Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to AIR's West Africa Payment Fraud Tech Sprint and Conference. Thank you everyone for being with us here today. We're thrilled that you have been able to join us. I'm Nick Cook, the Chief Innovation Officer at the Alliance for Innovative Regulation. Today and this week, we are focused on one of the most pressing challenges of our time, fraud. For those of you less familiar with AIR, the Alliance for Innovative Regulation, we are a non-profit organisation dedicated to modernising the financial regulatory system to ensure it can meet the challenges and needs of our 21st century. At AIR, we believe that harnessing innovation, technology, and the collaboration and creativity of humans is critical to building a safer, more inclusive financial system, one that works for everyone, everywhere. Today's programme begins with a keynote address from a visionary leader, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Aishah Ahmad. Following Aishah's keynote, we will host a panel discussion exploring a range of topics, including effective strategies and tools for fraud prevention and detection. We'll also look at the importance of building gender-sensitive payment infrastructures. We'll consider how we can ensure effective and affordable consumer protection. And we'll examine the critical role that partnerships and ecosystem collaboration can play in combating fraud. Before we dive in, though, a couple of very quick housekeeping points. Firstly, today's session will be recorded. So if you need to step away at any point, do not worry. You will be able to access the recording afterwards, and you can revisit this session later and share it with your friends and colleagues. Secondly, we encourage you to engage actively. Please use the chat function to pose any questions you may have. We'll attempt to address some of these during today's session where we can. We also have further sessions throughout this week where we can pick up some of your questions. And then afterwards, if appropriate, we'll engage with you on a one-to-one basis to cover up your questions. Let's talk about why we're here. Fraud. It is not just a financial crime. It is a profound societal challenge. It erodes trust in financial systems. It disproportionately harms the most vulnerable people in our societies. And it risks undermining the amazing progress that we've made in recent years. Over 1 billion people worldwide have gained access to financial services in the past decade, yet this progress is at risk. As digital economies expand across the globe, including in West Africa, digital payment systems bring incredible transformative opportunities for people, opportunities for growth and progress, but also they potentially fuel a sharp rise in fraud and the associated harms. Many sophisticated criminal networks who can adapt very, very quickly and use modern technology are preying on those individuals in our financial systems, and they look to exploit any vulnerabilities they can find at low cost and very high scale. And we can see that the stakes this could not be higher for individuals, for families, for businesses, and indeed for entire communities. Single fraudulent incidents can wipe out savings, can drive families deeper into poverty, can create really profound and significant deep emotional scars for individual humans, and can shake the very trust that people feel in both our financial systems and governments and society more broadly. So this week, we're going to be looking at solutions grounded in, we refer to it as the 5 Ps framework: prevention, protection, pursuit, policy, and partnership. We'll look at strategies to safeguard digital payments and ensure that they can remain a force for empowerment and opportunity, not for exploitation. And alongside this conference program, our Tech Sprint participants will be developing technology solutions ahead of a demo day on Friday, which you are all warmly invited to. But let's get back to today and our first session of this conference. It is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Aishah Ahmad. Aishah has been at the forefront of financial inclusion and policy innovation for many, many years. And we are very grateful for her attendance, and I'm excited to hear her insights today. As the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Aishah has been a leader in advancing financial inclusion, fostering innovation, and driving impactful change in West Africa's financial ecosystem. Her leadership and vision have left an indelible mark, and we are very fortunate to have her with us today to share her perspective on the path forward in addressing payment fraud. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming Aishah Ahmad. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. And thank you to CAIA for this opportunity to share my thoughts on this very, very important topic. Hello, everyone. I'm very honored to join you today as we kick off this very important tech sprint. Let me commend CAIA for this amazing idea, which would help us drive more collaboration and innovation to ensure responsible use of technology as we try to protect the financial system. In my brief keynote, I have a couple of minutes. I'd just like to share my reflections from my experiences, as Nick has mentioned, not just as a former regulator and policymaker, but also as someone that was a practitioner in the financial services industry, and of course, as a user of financial services as well. I'll center my conversation on how we can rethink a number of issues, collaboration, consumer empowerment, innovative regulation, etc., as we navigate this, fast evolving, ever-changing context of rising fraud and use of technology. So, as mentioned in the opening, digital financial services, DFS, is transforming financial inclusion in emerging economies like Nigeria. We're seeing a lot of growth and inclusion coming from this. I think this is reflected in the substantial and growing value of electronic transactions and the keen adoption of cryptocurrency on the continent. It's estimated that by 2030, 7 out of 10 payment transactions in Africa will be digital. That tells you that we haven't even scratched the surface in terms of the growth, that is still coming in terms of digital financial services. Now, this growth comes with vulnerability. According to NIBS, in 2023, digital channels accounted for 71% of payment fraud. And in particular, mobile channels were being increasingly targeted. And they are using social engineering tactics, exploiting human vulnerability. And the potential scale of what fraud could look like and the kinds of losses that could come from fraud can only be imagined when you look at the kind of growth we are projecting in the use of digital payments. Challenges with fraud include undermining public trust, as Nick has mentioned, exploiting low-income groups. There's the financial impact and economic impact. There's a psychological impact that, is not often discussed, but also has real effects. And it also undermines financial intimidation because as people lose trust in the financial system, they tend to gravitate towards cash and stop using formal financial services. So addressing this issue is critical to sustain consumer confidence in the market, to continue to promote financial inclusion and retain the advantages we've had thus far, and to maintain financial stability. Success will depend on rethinking a number of things. And as I reflected on preparing for this conversation, I said to myself, issues around technology, consumer empowerment, regulation, and collaboration within financial ecosystems still remain the critical levers for us to pull. So, technology. We are an informed audience, so we know that technology brings both opportunity and risk. Generative AI, for example, can help you enhance your fraud detection, but it also helps fraudsters, deploy cheaper, more sophisticated scams. I think technology is agnostic. Things like fraud, privacy issues, cyber threats, they are par for course. They are part of the territory if you're going to be adopting new technology. And I think as practitioners, as regulators, we should recognize that if tech is neutral, building innovative solutions should then have proactive safeguards within, since we recognize that tech is, agnostic and neutral. I'm very glad, and it's very positive development that banks have started to adopt tools like AI and, two-factor and multi-factor authentication, real-time transaction monitoring, all of these things to strengthen their defenses. But it's interesting also that the fraudsters, are exploiting what I called human vulnerabilities, social engineering. And we've also seen an increasing incidence of employee-related fraud, which tells you that, we need to, fraud technology is not the entire problem, neither is it the only solution, and this is where consumers come in. For me, consumer protection and empowerment is a collective responsibility of the regulators, financial service providers, and the consumers themselves. Fraud is not just a tech issue, it's a human issue, requiring human solutions. Some of the examples I like around, say, financial literacy programs are initiatives like Kenya's Dial 333 campaign, which was created when there were a lot of fraudulent attempts trying to penetrate their mobile money accounts. Now, I love that campaign because it was a collaborative effort between the communications team, the Communications Commission, mobile telecoms companies like Safaricom, and they use a combination of technology like, text messages, and also sort of rural engagement within rural areas to drive this message, to raise awareness about data protection and the kinds of social engineering methods that were being used to perpetrate the fraud. I'm very proud of that Nigerian banks are also organizing awareness campaigns. However, it's very important for us to sustain these efforts, expand them nationally, particularly to rural areas, and coordinate our consumer protection efforts. Regulation. I think regulation has been an important catalyst for financial inclusion, no doubt. Things like agent networks, tiered KYC, biometric verification, and initiatives like the fraud desk and the Nigerian Electronic Fraud Forum all helped to promote financial inclusion and protect against fraud. However, as the industry continues to evolve, regulators face complex choices: advancing financial inclusion or mitigating fraud. For example, if we overregulate financial systems, vulnerable populations are affected, services are not as seamless, and they're not likely to use them. However, we must also guard against using such financial inclusion channels like, say, tier 1 accounts and unregistered agents to perpetrate fraud. The solution is not more rules, but more openness, more co-creation between regulators, financial services providers, law enforcement, and other stakeholders. I think that kind of approach will balance inclusion and security while preserving accessibility and addressing risks. So let's talk about collaboration. Global best practice on collaboration is that it has to be complete, inclusive, so it needs to include everyone. We're talking not just banks, not just fintech companies, not just technology providers, but say telecoms providers, law enforcement, I mentioned that before, regulators, policymakers, government people. And it has to be cross-sectoral. And whilst this is sort of an emerging, because I see in terms of the research, there are emerging platforms like this across the continent, we need to do more. A few recommendations here. Firstly, we need a national task force on fraud that would involve all of the stakeholders that I mentioned earlier. We can benefit from digitizing, the processes within the regulatory framework, because if you digitize processes within law enforcement and within regulators, there'll be less bureaucracy, there'll be more faster action when we have fraud alerts, which we do get across agencies and across jurisdictions, and it'll be easier to improve reporting. I think a third idea would be to centralize our fraud reporting. So we have good data collection today. Yes, we need to improve reporting levels across financial institutions and all types and all sizes of financial institutions. But I think a central fraud reporting platform that also allows the public to use that platform to report fraud would be the most beneficial for us. I quite like the UK's Action Fraud Portal, which is a central tool, and it is the only single reporting platform for data collection, for intelligence sharing, and that platform also helps drive more collaboration across all the users. So this ecosystem approach will allow us to build the resilience, and strengthen trust in the financial system. I think this is as I round up, I think this matter is so critical that it actually may warrant a more global response. Why do I say this? Financial inclusion underpins at least 5 SDGs. The no poverty, zero hunger, good health, gender equality, decent work SDGs at the minimum. Now, anything that threatens those, so digital payment fraud, can actually hamper global progress in this respect. Given the interconnectedness of the financial system, the global nature of fraud, and the escalating fraud threats that we expect, it may be time to consider a more global framework or platform for addressing this issue. Such an initiative would bring together governments, financial institutions, civil society, tech firms to advance this, creating a more inclusive and secure ecosystem. In summary, I think digital payment fraud impacts lives, livelihoods, and the financial system. The most vulnerable are some of those that actually need financial services the most, but actually disproportionately are at risk. Addressing this challenge would need a combination of, integrating advanced technology, regulatory frameworks, consumer awareness, collaboration. And as we begin this tech sprint, I want us to keep this in mind. And I want to encourage us all to, bring forward our great expertise, our innovative ideas as we come up with, solutions that can strengthen our defenses against fraud. I'm very much looking forward to the in-person policy sprint in West Africa in 2025, where I know that some of the insights we'll gain from this week will be crucial, to drive a great conversation next year. I want to leave you in the very capable hands of Nick and the panel. And then just a short reminder. For me, as a former regulator, as a user of financial system, I think digital payment fraud is the great challenge of our time. And I'm confident that with the work CAIA is doing, and together, we have the capability and most importantly, the commitment to meet this defining moment head on and ensure that our financial systems are safe, secure, and inclusive for everyone. A longer version of my speech will be available to the CAIA team, so I'll share that later. I want to thank you very much for your attention and wish you a great week. Thank you.
Aishah, this is one of those moments where the round of applause is silent, but nonetheless very warmly felt. And I thank you dearly for your engaging and highly informative keynote comments. I'm sure many on this call will look forward to reading more of your thoughts on this matter. You have reminded us powerfully of the need for multifaceted action across regulatory innovation, across inclusive and effective collaboration, new forms of ecosystem activity, and the application of new technologies. With their double-edged nature, as you say, they present risks and opportunities for us. Perhaps it's time to contemplate an SDG on fraud itself, but nonetheless, the challenges and the scale of what is ahead of us are profound, and you've given us lots to think about. So thank you for that. Building on Aishah's remarks, we are going to now bring the panel into this session, and we will look at strategies, tools, partnerships, and other approaches to tackle fraud, alongside the importance of considering things like gender-sensitive infrastructure and gender disaggregated data to enable effective consumer protection and drive forward progress. So with this context, I'm delighted to briefly introduce our panelists who bring an enormous wealth of expertise and diverse perspectives. So today we have with us Modupe Ladipo, the founder and CEO of Prospera Development Consulting. We also have Sheila Senfuma, Head of Program for Digital Finance at Consumers International. Ikenna Ndugbu, Chief Compliance Officer at MoneyPoint. Yeah, I can see Ikenna laughing. I said I would struggle to pronounce his surname. I gave it a go, but I apologize. And to Femi Banigbe, Chief Executive Officer at Nine Mobile. Everyone is very welcome. Thank you for joining us. So I'm looking forward to hearing your perspectives, and we're going to get straight into that right away. But I will just remind those that have joined recently, this session is being recorded, and we will share the recording afterwards. And also to use the Q&A function if you wish to pose any questions. So Ikenna, having made a mess of your surname, I will start with a question for you, if I may, please. You are at MoneyPoint, a 9-year-old Nigerian fintech company, which achieved, I believe, the hallowed unicorn status just last month with its most recent fundraise. And you and I spoke a little bit earlier and discussed getting the balance right between business growth, financial inclusion, consumer satisfaction and delight, whilst also achieving sufficient security, compliance and resilience of those financial services. And fraud is certainly one of those issues that really challenges our ability to get that balance right. But I'd love you to share with our audience a little about your organization's core focus and some of the strategies and tools that you apply to deliver fraud prevention and detection. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Nick. Thanks also for this wonderful opportunity. I think this is the beginning of a long set of conversations, which I think will lead us to the promised land. So for us at MoneyPoint, I think the key thing for us is also financial inclusion. And financial inclusion for us is not just about access to financial services. It speaks about enabling individuals, businesses to improve their economic well-being, as well as having a positive impact on the economy, basically in the long run to foster a more stable environment and also a sustainable economy that will basically help Nigeria to be in a better light in the global commercial stage. So at MoneyPoint, we offer digital payment solutions that basically have 4 facets. I mean, we speak about convenience, cost efficiency, security, as well as speed. However, in delivering this, it is important that we do not compromise security, which I think is key for us in the part of fraud, because in trying to deliver speed, we will not compromise security. So what we try to do from the compliance perspective is to ensure that all required regulations having to do with things like data protection, data privacy are all in sync. We are up to date with our regulations as well as our internal policies, because we cannot just bring in these financially excluded people into the digital or the financial space without actually ensuring that the vulnerability, they are protected from the vulnerabilities of fraud. So what we basically did was try to strategize, at least from the beginning of this year, on ways to detect and prevent fraud, especially targeted at these vulnerable people. I think the first thing was also from beginning of this year when the Group CAIA gave his opening address for the beginning of the year, which was basically titled Sustained Growth and Compliance. And basically in compliance there, he meant compliance with all regulations and laws and guidelines guiding how we are going to try and prevent ourselves from being used as a conduit for fraud. I mean, the clear message was passed through the board to the senior management, as well as all the staff, and as well as also our third-party vendors. I mean, we have a zero tolerance for being used as a conduit for fraud. After that, I mean, the next key thing we did was to establish an effective KYC program. Now, the effective KYC program was basically to ensure that we are onboarding the right customers. You would agree with me that one is less likely to onboard a fraudster if you thoroughly know the customer. If you have actually done your thorough KYC on the customer, then you're less likely to onboard a fraudster, right? So the KYC program also came with ensuring that we do verification of these customers, as well as the customer acceptance policy, basically ensuring that we let everyone know the kind of businesses you're allowed to operate in MoneyPoint. For instance, within MoneyPoint, you are not allowed to engage in crypto or any kind of digital coin, cryptocurrency kind of transaction. So when this is detected, you're immediately asked to close your account, and this is reported to the regulators. Also, we also established the risk management assessment, basically trying to put different customers in different buckets to know when to do the enhanced due diligence or frequent monitoring. And then one of the key things we also did was the transaction monitoring tool, which I think Madam Aishah had also stated earlier. So for us, we created a robust fraud monitoring framework. And this was basically also from the top because we spared no expense to try and achieve this. We deployed a fraud monitoring tool that is managed currently with sufficient staff with the required skills. And also deploy the software, which is internally, we have two of them actually, one which is internally generated, and the second one, which basically manages the AI and the machine learning part of it, which is brought from external third party. So what we are trying to achieve is basically a fraud center of excellence. It will have a specialized team with the skills, the process and technology to combat this kind of fraud. It's going to have the capabilities, as I mentioned, of machine learning and AI, and it's going to be integrated into all these payment channels. It's going to have the rule-based algorithms. It's going to have the data and behavioral analytics to be able to monitor and analyze any kind of customer activity in real time. This is very important, especially because of the current speed that the frauds are going at this, the current times, right? So it has to be in real time, and it monitors customers' transactions and ensures that any deviations from the normal transaction pattern is basically raised and is duly monitored by the transaction monitoring team. And adding to that as well is also training because, as earlier mentioned, these fraudsters do not sleep. I mean, they're always on the grind. It's like every day they're coming up with new patterns. Right now is social engineering, the WhatsApp takeovers, coupled with some of the institutional frauds happening. So it's important that while we are also training our staff to be aware of this, we're also giving awareness to the customers. We'll keep giving them, whether on their app, on flyers, through SMS, through email, not to disclose their passwords, to be careful on how they handle their mobile phones. And when they do actually lose their mobile phone or devices, the channels where they can easily report this fraud for their accounts to be blocked. So that frequent awareness is also very important. We also deployed the risk-based multi-factor authentication. Realize this has also helped us to seriously reduce the fraud. Basically, what this does is effectively create a second level authentication for customers trying to finalize their accounts. Generally, you can log in with your passwords. However, passwords on your smartphone. However, when you're trying to finalize the transaction, it now requires you to provide a second level of security, which we have deployed on the smartphones as biometrics. It's either through your facial recognition or through your fingerprint. I think this has also gone a long way. Also, part of the strategy, I think this also came from the top, from our CE, was the collaboration with other fintechs. Because it's, as Madam says, we can't do this alone. We need the collaboration of everyone within the organization. So we brought about people within the fintech space, the payment solution space, also the government agencies, the regulators. We are trying to bring them together, create platforms where we can easily exchange information and quickly also reduce the turnaround time or response times to all these frauds we are having. So I think in conclusion, I think for fraud prevention, it's dynamic, it's multi-layered, and we must be able to adapt to new threats. So by combining technology that we have, the behavioral analysis systems, and also training our people to be highly qualified and highly skilled to do the monitoring, I think this has seriously helped us reduce fraud. So I think going forward, what I think is important for us to do as the financial institution is also increase the vigilance, invest in the advanced monitoring tools, because as Madam also said, technology is agnostic. The more you're advancing, the more the fraudsters are too. So we have to be a step ahead of them and also have a general proactive approach towards fraud prevention and also response time to these frauds. Thank you, Nick.
Wonderful. Ikenna, thank you. A brilliant 8-minute summary of a multifaceted approach to fraud prevention and response within a large financial technology company. Useful pointers for us around how you ensure the gateway is secure through multi-factor authentication and KYC, use of advanced sophisticated analytics and AI for transaction monitoring, and then really thinking about the human capabilities that are needed, both the human capabilities within your organization and the mechanisms by which you collaborate and interact and engage with your peers and your ecosystem. Thank you for that. I'm going to turn to Modupe now and ask you to just kind of reset for us a little bit around the issues that we're trying to grapple with here in terms of addressing the financial inclusion needs of societies, and specifically thinking about how we understand the progress that we're making and what else we might need to build in the infrastructure to achieve our goals. I know you've got a strong interest specifically in kind of gender sensitive infrastructure and gender disaggregated data. So if you could share with us a little bit of your thoughts on the issue that we're going after and how we might better develop systems and solutions that meet all needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you very much, Air, for the opportunity. I think when we look at it from a position of women, we often get accused of being a bit too sensitive or, not including the men. So there are many reasons why we want to focus on women. Most populations, for example, in Nigeria, women account for, almost 50% of the population. And if we say we want to build inclusive economies, then we need to be able to support and include these women in our inclusive systems. And by including women in financial systems, we can unlock their potential as active economic agents. We can improve household well-being. We foster entrepreneurship. And most importantly, we can address SDG 1 that says no poverty. So we can help to reduce poverty. Many women in many communities face a whole lot of challenges. And across Africa, those challenges are slightly different to the challenges that are faced in developed countries. They face challenges such as limited access to financial services, social norms that restrict their economic participation. And if we look at Nigeria in particular, and we want to talk about where are all the gender gaps that we see gender gaps across multiple areas: access to finance, ownership of mobile phones, ownership of smartphones, level of financial capability, lower levels of digital literacy, lower levels of financial literacy, lower levels of income, lower levels of education. A lot of them don't really, English is not their main language of comfort, both in writing and in reading. And for example, in Nigeria, if we look at the banking level of banking men versus women, in adults, we see that there's an 11% gap. So 58% of adult men have a bank account versus 47% of women that have a bank account. And this gap sort of persists across most of the formal financial services. The only time you see women participating more than men is in the informal financial services like savings groups, VSLAs, etc. So we really need to think about how we're going to bring women into digital systems in a way that fosters equity. I hear earlier on both Aishah and Femi have said that, or Ikenna have said that technology is agnostic, right? However, there are certain things that we still need to do to make sure that even though it's agnostic, we need to tweak certain things to make sure that we include women. For example, sometimes on the mobile phone, we've talked about sending text messages, we've talked about sending emails. Women do not have access to emails. Connectivity costs are too high, so they don't have that. They do not know the language in which we send the emails. They don't understand it. So they do not really know what message you're sending to them. So we need to really think through how do we provide this information in a way that most women can understand and can relate to. In addition, the mobile phones, you need to make easy interface because sometimes the interface is very clumsy and difficult. Go here, then do that. And women don't have the patience and tolerance to deal with all of that, considering all the other multiple competing tasks that they have to do on a daily basis. So I would encourage people to think about easy to use interfaces, Think about first-time users, what you need to do. Think about how we need to incorporate low levels of literacy into the information that we provide. In addition, we need to do a lot more around customer-sensitive education programs around financial literacy. They need to be culturally sensitive, they need to be consistent, and they need to be regular. Because I think we just think we do it once. Once we do it once, we say we've done it. We're okay, we've given them financial literacy. But that's not the case. We need to think about the economic inequalities. We need to think about the regional differences, and we also need to think about the language differences. So as we try and educate customers on, okay, we want you to come into the formal financial system, these are the things that you need to think and consider. And then we also need to educate them about the benefits of digital services, but also the security of digital payments. Many a time I've been to the ATM in Nigeria and I've seen people at the ATM, they don't know how to use the ATM. The security, because in Nigeria, most banks have a security guard by the ATM. The security guard tells them, give me your PIN, I will show you what to do. Let me help you get your money out of your account, right? Now, if those people take more money than they've told them to, they would not know. If those people commit any type of fraud, they're less likely to know. And then imagine that scenario. If I go to my bank and say, oh, my account has been compromised, and they say, did you share your PIN with anybody? And I say, yes, I gave it to the security. Then I have to bear the risk. I have to bear that outcome because they've told us, don't share your PIN with anybody, and yet we have done that. So when we come to the issue of fraud, particularly related to how we're going to get women into using DFS, we know that no system will ever be 100% fraud-proof. It's just not possible. Like Aishah said, the previous speakers also said, the fraudsters are working hard. Just as we are working hard, they're also equally working hard to make sure that they can breach the system. But interesting enough, a few years ago, we did a survey and we asked people, who are your financial regulators in Nigeria? Most people don't even know. Some people said the BBC. Some people said the World Bank. Now, if the consumers do not know who their regulators are, they do not know where to go to when fraud happens. Fraud will always happen, but how quickly we deal with that fraud is what will build trust in the system, right? So if I only have 20 Naira, fraud happens, my 20 Naira is gone, how quickly I get a response, one way or the other, would help me understand that if fraud happens, this is what I need to do, these are the steps I need to take, etc. We do not in Nigeria have an independent financial ombudsman. We have different organizations. So if I have a problem with the bank, I call my bank's customer care, they tell me whatever, fob me off. I go to the central bank, it's a long process. I go here, I go there, right? We do have the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, but that one deals with all types of consumer affairs, not just financial related. So as we're trying to think about the pieces of the puzzle that we need to put in place in order to make sure that we safeguard the particularly vulnerable segments of society, which are the low-income earners, the women, people living with handicaps, forcibly displaced people, we really need to think about what are the things that will help them feel comfort in that system. So having an independent financial ombudsman is important. We only last year enacted the data protection law. There are many components around it that still need to be put in place. We need to think about that. Aishah did mention having a sort of like a national body that would look across fraud. I know in the UK, they have a crime unit called the DCPCU, which is a dedicated card and payment crime unit. Perhaps we need to consider and look at how that works, because what we need to be able to do is have regular, up-to-date, real-time trends in fraud that is happening across the industry. So once we have that data, we know how to then customize the information we're going to share with customers, right? So these are the things we're seeing both nationally, across Africa, and globally, because those trends that happen there are coming here, and some of the trends here are also going there. So we now can have a global picture, real time, of all the types of fraud that is taking place. Once we then have that, we can then communicate effectively to our consumers. These are the types of frauds we're seeing. This is how you should safeguard. I recently saw that the Central Bank of Eswatini said they were going to launch customer fraud awareness campaigns. So if we can do that on a more regular basis, maybe on a monthly basis, based on what the data is showing us, telling them this is the fraud that we see, this is how you protect yourself. This is the fraud you see, this is how you protect yourself. Then we may begin to start tackling the prevalence of these frauds, especially towards the vulnerable groups. And my last point is really on gender disaggregated data. We need to be able to collect this data, especially on digital payments usage and on fraud-related issues, so that then we can understand how women and these vulnerable groups are maybe affected disproportionately to the rest of the population. And if so, then we can then come up with specific targeted interventions that we know will then help to support and minimize some of this fraud. And the last other thing about fraud as well, Aishah did touch on it. Fraud is both internal and external. There's a lot of internal fraud that is happening at the moment, abetted by corrupt individuals working within the financial institutions. We need to think about how do we address those as well, because those will not necessarily show up, or financial institutions may not want to disclose that they have these internal, they lump it all together, but we see the amount, but we don't see the types of frauds they're perpetuating. So if we understand those levels of fraud internally as well, then we can help to protect our consumers from both internal fraud and external fraud. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Modupe, thank you. I have the pleasure and the challenge of hosting a panel with such a group of people that could easily fill an hour with amazing insights on their own. So I'm sorry that I'm not following up directly with a question, but I really enjoyed your comments. I think you really helped us to understand the power of empowering women who individually and collectively can have a really outsized influence on prosperity, financial resilience, growth and progress in societies, and yet have highlighted to us how disempowered many of those individuals are through lower levels of education, access to technologies, lower income amounts, but also challenges around digital and financial literacy. I was struck as well by your comments about if we don't build solutions that are specifically tailored to women, we will never address this issue. I remember a conference I went to some time ago where a speaker said, when we don't design and build for women, we don't design and build for everyone, we build for men. And it was just a very simple but powerful message that if we just assume that a solution for everyone is built for men and women, and yet we haven't considered those individual needs, it's more likely that we've actually just built a system that is very well targeted and focused on men's needs. Sheila, I know a lot of what Modupe has said will be resonant for you as well in your work around consumer protection and how we build sufficiently robust and effective mechanisms to both protect consumers, but then also help and fix issues when things go wrong. So I wondered if you'd like to share anything more with us around how we get that right, how we enable protection and trust and confidence in financial services, particularly for those who are perhaps more vulnerable or less familiar with the formal financial system.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and to the panelists. I think they've made my work easy because almost everything has been mentioned. But yeah, just building on to what Modupe has shared, I think for us, from lots of recent research and also from recent interventions that we've been part of, firstly, we realized that for every 1 point increase in vulnerability, there is a 1.28 increment in negative outcomes to consumers. And when we're talking about vulnerability, we're talking about consumers like women consumers, youth who are first-time users of digital financial services, and also looking at people with disabilities. And just shedding some light on that, this year at the ITU Global Symposium, one of the speakers did actually say that he was here visually impaired, and he did say that usually some of the digital financial solutions that are being innovated require 100% digital literacy of some sort. And then for them to access them, they need to purchase particular gadgets to help them if they don't have someone who's equally digitally literate, which means that they end up buying solutions that are cheap or cropped versions of the legit version they should be using to be able to access services that everyone accesses easily. And with this comes, because they're cropped versions, it means that they're more exposed to frauds because the protections that are in the official or authenticated devices are not available in the cropped versions. So already we see that even with particular groups of consumers, already in the marketplace, we've made it impossible for those who cannot who have particular disabilities to access services but we've also not provided for them to navigate those in a way that's easily affordable to them. So we do see those various aspects that come up. But also in terms of speaking about financial literacy programs, I did like that Ikenna did mention that they're coming up with these particular trainings or updates, awareness to consumers to understand the frauds that are happening in the space. But we also see in some of the other areas where there are various digital financial literacy trainings that are put in place, but they're not always fit for purpose. Maybe they've been gotten from an existing curriculum, tweaked a little bit, but what we are experiencing, what consumers are experiencing are issues around transparency, are issues around new types of frauds, are issues around understanding who is the regulator to go to when they have a problem. So in terms of the way these are designed, it's very critical that the awareness campaigns or the digital and financial literacy campaigns are designed in ways that replicate or speak about actual issues that consumers are facing. Whether it's around, in Uganda recently, there is a campaign called Better Steady. It's basically Be Steady. And they tell you do not give your national ID as collateral to money lenders. Do not take calls from a number that starts in a certain way. They try to mimic existing frauds to ensure that consumers can relate to them. And this is in various languages and across various channels. We're yet to measure the impact. Most of them started this year. But I think there's been some progress already, because you ask people and they're like, no, that's, but there is this campaign that says this and that. So it's very critical to see that even as we come up with these solutions, they are fit for purpose, they're customized to different audiences, and that the different users of digital financial services are benefiting from them. I think another thing for me that I think is really critical is redress systems that actually work, that all the panelists, I think, have said, and we all know for certain that innovation is moving faster than regulation can catch up. Fraudsters are not sleeping. In fact, they are more active than any of us in the ecosystem. But the only way we can actually try to catch up is by taking advantage of the redress, the complaints data that we're getting from the consumers of digital financial services. Usually you realize that consumers will complain about an issue, whether through their peers or officially, and no one will take note until it escalates or until a government official is affected, in Africa particularly. And then they'll be like, oh, okay, this has happened to me. I'll go ahead and then work with the right people to come up with the right frameworks or the right policies in place to ensure that consumers are protected. So it's very critical to find a way through which the various ecosystem stakeholders, whether it's regulators, policymakers, independent bodies and CSOs, fintechs and industry, how do we all come together to ensure that the information that we're getting through complaints data is hosted in a particular place where we could easily monitor trends, real-time trends in the way complaints are changing from consumer bodies or consumer representatives. And from this, we can easily see that, okay, this wasn't a risk, it's starting to pop up. How can we manage before it scales or before it gets to a place that it affects more consumers than it otherwise would if we had taken note earlier on? So for me, I feel like it's critical to see how we can leverage some of the new innovations, whether it's AI, whether it's deep data analytics, to see how we can leverage some of those to have real-time monitoring and analytics, more detailed, complex analytics around the kind of complaints that are coming through, but also make sure that consumers are aware of the redress channels that are in place and that these are designed in a way that they can access. Like I did say, for some of these, either they're very expensive or there is an element of sacrifice. Like if I'm a woman and I have to choose between using the toll-free line, which will never go through, or the paid line where I have to pay like 1,000 shillings to access, while there's another critical need within the family, I'll most likely choose the critical need over the redress channel that actually works. So how are we designing for those particular unique issues, even in all these different processes? So for me, I think that's also very critical. How are we leveraging our redress systems? How are we communicating liability in the event of loss? Does the consumer know who is liable, especially when it's not their fault? All these have to be very clear, and we need to all work together to see how we can be able to leverage each other's strengths at the different points within the transaction process. Thanks, Nick. I'll hand over to you now.
Again, fabulous. Thank you very much. I really like your points around, the roles that regulators are going to need to increasingly play in empowering and enabling that level of consumer education about their protections and their rights and also their individual responsibilities as consumers when they transact in these systems. I think very powerful as well, your points around, let's ensure we've got the right evidence and data to refine the policies effectively. So let's make sure that the complaint mechanisms are effective in actually telling us what the customer experience is and what the customer harms are, and also what the level of customer understanding about the risks and issues are, and using that to calibrate and effectively design more appropriate redress and other mechanisms for consumers. And then I think, ultimately you've pointed a lot to highly differentiated needs in different consumer groups. So it's tempting to just kind of think of the vulnerable or the unbanked or the underserved and sort of lump that group together. But actually within any of these communities or constituents, we have highly differentiated user bases that have very different both needs and abilities and understandings of the products and services. And so perhaps there is a real place now for the much more sophisticated technology we have to play a role in delivering much more bespoke and personalized and sophisticated customer interactions to help those different groups. But as I said before, you all have so much to say. It's very difficult to then run this as a panel. So I am going to give Femi the opportunity to make some comments as well. I'd be really delighted, Femi, to hear some of your thoughts about, let's talk a bit more about partnerships. Some of the other panelists have mentioned this, the importance of collaboration and partnerships between different members of the ecosystem. Obviously, from a telco perspective, the telecommunications industry has played a massive role in enabling the growth of financial inclusion and digital payments. But can you share us a little bit about your thoughts on how you deliver efficient collaboration and maybe what you think is missing in terms of ecosystem collaboration at the moment?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Femi. I am the CEO for Nine Mobile. It's a pleasure to be on this call. And then I would first like to commend all the speakers for basically highlighting all the key initiative that everybody has been. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you. We can hear you, Femi.
Yes.
Carry on.
Okay, cool stuff. Just making sure. Okay, so essentially, appreciating all the speakers for the initiative that everybody has talked about. I guess that you've made my work very, very simple and a little bit so that I will not go and repeat what everybody has said. I think that just to start to say that the first speaker and the keynote speaker talked about fraud being a human challenge and not necessarily a technology issue. Even though technology is agnostic, it can be tailored made to be able to allow people to do whatever it is they want to do. But there are a few things that we can do on the technology side that can actually make it more difficult for fraudsters to take advantage of the system. One of the biggest headache, because most of the fraud that's related to payment in this part of the world has to do with identity theft. One of the biggest headache is really how do you ensure that you integrate the entire KYC process into existing databases now. So as telcos, one of the key vital, I would say, asset that we have, it has to do with that of our SIM registration database. A lot of the fintech utilizes the MSISDN of the subscriber to be able to identify the user, knowing that in our part of the world, not so many people use email addresses, not so many people have other form of IDs that can easily remembered or easily identifiable. So you see that most of the people will use their mobile phones or mobile numbers to be able to identify themselves. And there is also the aspect of sending OTPs, the one-time password verification, or the other what we call the dual factor authentication. A lot of these also depends on sending an SMS verification to a mobile phone. So I think in combating identity theft, one of the things that telcos can bring to the table is really opening up our SIM registration database in a secured way to fintech so that you can access some of this data and being able to use that as part of your verification process. So I think that if we manage to get this right and be able to find a way to share to share data with payment partners, even though in Nigeria, telcos, unlike in East Africa or in some part of West Africa, the mobile money regime here in Nigeria is more bank-led and not telco-led. It's more fintech-led. So recently, telcos got into the game, but we basically had to separate our mobile money business from our traditional telco business. However, the key thing is being able to ensure that the KYCs are done correctly. So recently, a couple of telcos, including Nine Mobile, have partnered with some fintechs to be able to give them access to SIM registration database that allows us to be able to verify whether the person who claims to be the owner of the number is really actually the exact owner of the number. So that helps to reduce fraud. Now, one of the other things that we need to talk about has to do with integrating biometric information into identity verification. Now, one of these can be using things like your fingerprint as part of our customer registration process. We take the fingerprints of everybody that has a mobile phone. We actually do take their pictures as well. So all of this information is available in a database repository that we can basically make available. Aside from our own internet database, and this information is also being cross-checked with the NAMC database, that's the National Identity Management Center database, that also gives the same information. So recently, the government of Nigeria required us to bar some SIM cards because of the issues of the compliance in terms of the information that we collect versus the information that is provided in the National Identity Management Center database. So if there is a disconnect between those information, we are required to bar those source customers, basically take them, prevent them from being able to make calls. So now when you have a database that has a lot of information, apart from just the number verification, the biometric information can be very, very useful. So the challenge that we face as technology company that also needs to have data protection as part of our regulatory compliance mechanism is to make sure that we can provide this information in a way that is accessible to the payment companies, and making sure that it's easy for people to be able to use that as part of the enhanced KYC process. So another thing I'm going to talk about is this whole idea of data pooling. And that is being able to share anonymized transaction data and behavioral analytics across different partners so that we can improve fraud detection. So this has to be a community initiative and not just a single telco. Otherwise, if it's just a single telco, a single bank, or a single payment company, like they say what MoneyPoint is doing, but is it possible to make available some behavioral analysis that are a little bit anonymized because of competition laws, just to ensure that we can identify suspicious patterns. We can be able to identify unusual payment location or high frequency transactions. That would enable us to be able to at least have more synergy as we collaborate among ourselves. Some of the speakers have talked about real-time blacklisting. I think that the major challenge between that we face is the time when a fraud occurs to the time when there is a corrective actions to track the fraud. The time will have elapsed, and that is mostly because it becomes very difficult for the customer to compromise to have access to either his telco or his fintech company or his bank. The time it takes to get that done, the fraudsters have basically moved ahead and taken the money that they need to take. So being able to have real-time blacklisting and being able to have real-time blacklisting of compromised accounts and compromised SIM is a major milestone that we need to aim towards, especially in this part of the world. There is a system that I think the NCC was trying to implement a couple of months back. I'm not so sure if that is still on track, and that has to do with the old equipment identity register that allows you to be able to block SIM and also block a phone that has been suspected to have a lot of malicious activity. What else I'm going to talk about? Now, in terms of the whole security architecture for accessing information that has to do with customer, I think that one of the things that we are doing in our own side is really being able to, let me say, tighten the process of access controls within our environment. Now, a lot of the fraud that happens in our market is not just external fraudsters. Sometimes they collaborate with internal employees or what we call internal staff that have access to certain information. And then because the collaboration between staff and then the fraudsters eventually can then create a little bit more damage. So making sure that you have a much more controlled transaction log, you have proper access control, you have a proper tracking of who access what information, and ability to utilize advanced analytics tools to spot a lot of these behavioral patterns that involves internal staff can actually help in reducing fraud. Because of time, I'm just going to talk about a little bit more around collaboration. I'm very big when it comes to collaboration. This has to be an ecosystem approach. Companies have to share intelligence more. We also need to actually do what I would call public campaign, public awareness, to educate public about common fraud tactics, such as the phishing, the smishing, the social engineering scams. And it has to be a joint effort. In even implementing financial literacy programs to teach people how to securely manage their passwords, recognize fraudulent websites, and avoid sharing sensitive information. So that's what I will say, and I will hand over the floor to the other speakers. Thank you very much.
Femi, thank you very much. And your fellow panelists created a challenge for you to come up with as many insightful points, and you have risen to that challenge very, very well. Thank you for all of that. I mean, I think naively, some of us think primarily about the infrastructural role that telcos play in enabling digital payments. But as you've highlighted, it's a lot more than that. It's about also the exchange of important data for identity and verification. It's about enabling the movement of certain transactional level data around one-time passes and the like. But then also really, playing your role in data pooling and the advanced analytics that allows us to understand fraud trends and how we might intervene in them. We have flown through an hour. I'm very sorry that we haven't actually got to questions. What we will do is there are a few that have been raised, so we will take those and we will discuss them a little bit with the panelists, and we will, as part of follow-up after this event, we will share some outputs on that. But I do have to bring this session to a close, regrettably. So I'm going to firstly thank all of my panelists for their incredible insights and wealth of different perspectives and content that they've given you all today. I hope everyone found it fascinating and helpful. I'd also like to thank all of you for joining us for this session. And if this has piqued your interest, you have sessions throughout this week that will drill deeper into some of the topics we've covered here today. So tomorrow there are sessions on gender-sensitive infrastructure and a couple of showcases on specific technology solutions in the fraud detection and monitoring space. On Wednesday, we focus more on complaints and redress mechanisms and building effective policies and systems for those matters. On Thursday, we look a little bit more at some of the technology solutions that can enable both RegTech and supervisory technology solutions for regulators. And then, of course, we conclude with our demo day. So on the screen now is the QR code where you can sign up for future sessions. Again, thank you, everyone, for making the last hour fly by and for all of the insights and ideas that you've shared. And then just a thank you from me and the AIR team for all of the, there's a lot of conversations today about collaboration and ecosystems. We wouldn't have got to this point, nor the rest of the conference, nor the tech sprint without many others leaning in as well. So thank you to all of those on the screen that have helped bring us to this moment. I'm going to leave it there a few minutes over, so apologies for those of you whose diary I have impacted. But again, thanks for your time and enjoy the rest of the week. Please sign up for the sessions. There's lots more to be discussed. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.